The news is finally official. Alex Jensen is the next head coach of the Utah men's basketball program. So, was it smart for Utah to copy the BYU route of hiring an NBA assistant to lead their college program? That's what we're discussing on today's Locked On Utes and Locked On Cougars crossover.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes and Locked On Cougars your first listen every single day. We are available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. As your first time listening to either of our shows, make sure you like and subscribe. Today's episode of Locked On Utes and Locked On Cougars is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. My name is JT Wistersill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to be joined by Locked On Cougars Jake Hatch. And Jake, we've known for a few days, thanks to Sean O'Connell, Steve Bartle, Alex Markham, we're all kind of in on this and said, hey, Alex Jensen is going to be the next head coach of the Utah men's basketball team, but had to wait for the final little papers and everything to be signed. It's now official. This is absolutely the move that Utah needed to make to inject life and energy into their men's basketball program. Alex Jensen comes in with a really good NBA pedigree, a former running Ute legend. There's a rumor that even Andre Miller may be on his way as well, too. So this feels like the right move to get Utah basketball back on track, especially because reports are the NIL is going to be bolstered by this as well.
Okay, well, let me at the outset just say this. Way to go, Utah, following BYU's route of success. Okay, now, I'm only saying that facetiously, Utah fans. Don't jump in my mentions. You already all been all over them. Anyway.
They will. But
they will. But the bigger point to be made, though, is Alex Jensen is a fantastic hire for the University of Utah. And, JT, the thing about this is, as you mentioned, it's going to inject life back into that Utah basketball program. The reporting out there, Steve Bartle saying he's going to make north of $4 million. That's right in line with what BYU reportedly is paying Kevin Young. These are former NBA guys. They want NBA-type money, obviously, to take the leap here. But the bigger question to be had is, you already mentioned as well, NIL dollars. We have seen BYU. They have stepped up. They're going to be paying a guy like A.J. DiBonsa north of potentially $8 million next year to come and play for the Cougars. So BYU's got their NIL funds well stocked. My question remaining for Utah beyond this, because I think Alex Jensen is the right hire. He's the perfect hire for the program. Does he have the financial backing to make a difference?
I think he does, based on the reports, to make a difference. I've heard that it's going to be somewhere. I think Alex Markham's talked about this too, like over $6 million potentially that Utah's going to have at their disposal. So that's something. But I don't think it's going to be what BYU has. I don't expect Utah to be able to land the A.J. Dumbonsas of the world, like the top overall player. But just to be able to get a better quality of roster in, I mean, it's hard for me to believe on paper, based on what's been reported, that the Utah basketball roster won't look better on paper next year than it did coming into the season this year. Now, will they perform and be a top 10 team? That's the thing that remains to be seen. But I do think absolutely, Jake, to answer kind of the question I posed of did Utah make the right move by hiring an NBA assistant like BYU did? 1,000% they did, because of what Alex Jensen represents. It's not just because like, hey, BYU did this, so we have to do this. It's no. Alex Jensen's a really good coach. He's with the Jazz for a long time. This is now has success with the Dallas Mavericks. It is funny timing that this also happened like when the Luka Doncic trade happened and the Mavs organization just looks at a terrible direction it's heading in now. Jensen's like, okay, I'll jump back to college too. But the Utah has for a long time been trying to get back to the days in the 90s when they made the national championship. Now, I don't think it's realistic to expect that, but to want to be a team that consistently makes the NCAA tournament like those teams back then did, that's absolutely realistic to me. And an alumni hire, like we said, it's what's needed to get everyone, boosters included, back on board. So this definitely was the right hire, even if it means you have to follow in BYU's footsteps.
Well, yeah, let me also add this to the conversation with regards to Alex. He, as you mentioned, is going to come in and kind of give this program a jolt that it is needed for quite some time. I'm a kid who grew up in this state. I watched those teams from Utah in the 90s do what they were doing. Rick Majerus had this absolutely incredible thing rolling, and Alex played in that system. The Johnson brothers. There were just so many players that went through that basketball program, that were just elite players, and you couldn't help but admire them, even as a BYU guy, from what they accomplished, going and playing Kentucky in that national championship, the whole thing. The question now will be, okay, how quickly can he engineer a turnaround here? And the other part of it is He's coming in with an NBA background. Now, he did spend time working for Rick Majerus at St. Louis during Rick's final stint as a head coach. So he has some collegiate experience. But the college game that he left in 2013, if I recall correctly, when he first jumped to the NBA, JT, now over a decade later, it's a completely different looking game. But the nice part is it's become more professionalized, much more like the NBA. And that should give Alex an opportunity to translate some of the stuff he's learned at the professional level and bring it down to the University of Utah.
And that's what's made it fascinating, is the fact that now you see Alex Jensen, Kevin Young last year, like, be willing to make the transition to college, because in the past, a lot of times you've seen these guys, even Alex Jensen literally was in the running in 21. He pulled his name out because he said, like, I don't feel like it's the right time for me to coach college. So that's where some of the NIL changes actually could end up being a positive thing for Utah, because you're able to land a coach of this caliber too. And I think what's nice for Utah is this is a team that has a chance, like, right, even though they're 10th right now, like, right away, they could be better because of NIL. We see how quickly programs and teams turn it around. Obviously, BYU was, you guys were still good last year in the NCAA tournament, but the way you're closing the season, the win against Iowa State, like, there's a different energy around the Cougars right now. And I think the hope for Utah is they can have that similar energy down the stretch. And I mean, Jake, how much do you feel like having someone with NBA pedigree like Kevin Young has elevated the BYU men's basketball program?
Well, it scuffled along for a little bit there. If you look at the earlier parts of this season, BYU started Big 12 play 1-3, 2-4, if I recall correctly, what the record was, and all of a sudden they figured it out.
I think they lost to Utah too, right? I think they did.
They did. Another 1 point loss up there on the hill. We'll talk more about the payback that's coming here in a minute. But the thing is you look at where BYU was just about a month ago now, JT, and where they are now. That proverbial light bulb flicked on for BYU. The players, Kevin Young, his staff, they all kind of got in sync with one another, and they've been flying ever since. That's got to be the hope for Utah a year from now, that they can see a similar type impact as to what has happened here. You mentioned the fact, yes, BYU was an NCAA tournament team last year. So, yeah, the cupboards weren't bare, and I don't think the cupboards are necessarily bare at Utah. Now, we'll see what happens roster-wise. Alex could come in and say, I'm whacking everybody. Everybody's gone. We're clean. We're clearing house. I wouldn't do that if I were him. I would try and keep some of the pieces around, guys like Keanu Dawes and the like, and build around that. But the thing is, you've got to look, and I know it perturbs Utah fans to consider this, but look at where BYU was earlier this season. Look at where they're at right now, and envision a year from now potentially that happening. And that may be that BYU's at an even higher level next year because they're bringing in the number one recruit in the country and AJ DeBonsa. So that obviously should elevate BYU to another level. But the path to success, it's been trod by BYU. And if Utah follows it, it appears that it is a path that can lead to what Utah fans want. And that is NCAA tournament bursts and wins in the Big 12 and competing at a much higher level than they have been.
It absolutely is. And I do think this is an interesting conversation probably for another pod, but I do not think Utah should become obsessed with having a better basketball program year in and year out than BYU. If they can be better than them a year or two, sure, that sounds great. But especially unless something changes, and yes, we're hearing the NIL is going to be better, the fact that the Cougars just landed the number one player in the country, it still puts them on another stratosphere than what Utah has done. So be better than BYU for a year. You get the right combination, the right mix, maybe even like 2 years in a row. Sure. But like consistently, if BYU is able to offer that much, I mean, real quick, Jake, I just don't think that's a good idea for Utah to say like, oh, we're going to beat BYU. We're going to beat BYU every single year. We need to be a better program than them. I don't know if NIL is going to let that be a thing, genuinely.
Well, success will beget a success. Let's just put it this way. If Alex Jensen goes out and proves that he can win with the resources being allocated to begin with, there will be more donors who come online and will be willing to donate to NIL. But conversely, if he struggles out of the gate, how many of those donors are going to say, you know what, same old story? That's Here's the thing with NIL. BYU's NIL fund could dry up tomorrow. That's just the way it is. You have these donors and they're willingly putting money into the pot. And I'm not saying that's going to happen for BYU. I'm not saying it's going to happen for Utah, but you have to be aware of where that money is coming from, and you have to appease those people. And that it's a really, really fine line here as to not trod and step on the toes of the coach, but at the same time, not do apparently what Craig Smith reportedly did and turn off the entire donor base.
Yeah, that's kind of how you get axed a little early as well, in addition to the fact that they really wanted Alex Jensen to be the next head coach too. So yeah, this season winding down. As Jake mentioned, we are eventually going to get to Utah and BYU facing off on Saturday evening, but do want to talk a little bit about BYU spring football that's underway. And Utah wants to know what's kind of going on with their rival as well too. We'll be discussing all of that in one moment. Today's crossover episode of Locked On Utes and Locked On Cougars is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on the fourth quarter comeback you think your team's about to make, that's where you can head over to FanDuel. You can stay in on the action with FanDuel, and you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I mean, I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. This is FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com to join today. Your shot at $150 in bonus bets. You can make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And don't forget, March Madness right around the corner too, so you can head over to FanDuel for that. MLB baseball nearly back, and the race for the 1 seed in each conference feels like it's kind of wrapping up. The Thunder, obviously, and then the Cavs well taking care of it. But how about the rest of the playoffs? Who's going to be in the play-in? Which teams are going to end up in the lottery? We know that the Jazz are probably going to have a high pick too. So whatever way you think it's all going to shake out, make sure you head over to FanDuel Sportsbook today. Jake Hashback here with me. Jake, BYU spring ball is underway, so we're getting football back. Utah's will be going on later in the month. Obviously, Utah's goal is to bounce back against their rival, and BYU was towards the top of the conference last year too, where Utah hopes to be. So I am curious, how was the first couple? I think it was first week, right, for the Cougars? How have things been trending so far?
Really, I'm not going to lie. It's been pretty blasé. That's probably the term I would use. BYU, and it's not. It's a bad thing at BYU. Here's the deal, JT. BYU brings back a ton of the production that led them to an 11-2 record last year, and that's the thing about this is there's not a lot of controversy with the Cougars. There's not a quarterback battle. You're not wondering if this defense is going to struggle like it had for the 3 or 4 years before Jay Hill came in to take over. The thing about BYU is it's kind of how much better can they improve now that can lead them hopefully past a Kansas or an Arizona State and get themselves into the Big 12 title game and potentially a chance to play in the college football playoff. That's the storyline around BYU right now. And the sad part is that really can't play out until we get to the fall.
It can't. And it's interesting how different the storylines will be for BYU versus the Utah, because Utah, you know who the quarterback's going to be. It's going to be Devin Dampier, but still haven't seen him yet. So you get your first look at him. What does Jason Beck's offense at least look like a little bit? You get to watch. This is the one time with Utah we get to see the practices and things of that nature. So that's actually exciting that we'll get a look and see what Dampier looks like, some of the new other pieces that Utah's added as well. And I mean, Jake, I'm excited for spring ball for that reason. And this Utah team, I mean, no Junior Tafuna, no Zamiah Vaughn, no Karene Reed. Like, there's a lot, no Cam Rising, no Brant Keith. That's a lot that Utah has to replace. So I'm curious to see who's going to step up, be some of the leaders. Utah has a lot of questions they do need to answer in spring ball.
Sure, and that's the thing about this is Utah spring ball will be infinitely more interesting, I think, just from a storylines standpoint. And I know I'm not trying to say that BYU doesn't have storylines. There's inevitably going to be something that emerges from BYU spring camp, whether it's some player that emerges and all of a sudden it's like this hot shot young player that you're looking forward to. I think the biggest thing for a BYU is, okay, what do the former Utes in Hunter Clegg as well as Keanu Tanavasa? Are they living up to their billing as the next stud defensive lineman for BYU? That's kind of the storyline we're tracking in Provo. Whereas, as you mentioned, yeah, Jason Beck takes over as offensive coordinator here. Can Kyle Whittingham get this back on track? And then when is he going to step aside and hand it over to Morgan Scalley? The storylines for Utah are much more plentiful than BYU right now. But once again, it goes back to your original point. These are two programs in two different places right now. Utah was thought to be where BYU is right now last year going into the season, but it kind of turned out that they were opposite. BYU's a top-tier program in the Big 12 right now, and their expectation is to go to the Big 12 title game, whereas Utah, okay, get back to a bowl game, number one, and can you push to 7 or 8 wins and restore some glory into this program and set up what would I think is the next era of Utah football with Morgan Scalley and set it up for success. So it's an interesting dichotomy to watch these two, and I am very curious to see what these two programs ultimately look like mid-season when these two square off in that rivalry game.
I don't think you're wrong that Utah's just trying to get back to bowlability and, maybe being an 8-win team, things of that nature. But there's one person who's obviously not going to be satisfied with that. That's Kyle Whittingham. I mean, this feels like it's going to be his last year. This is a Utah team that wants to make a push. I think they have the pieces. By the way, very nice work for you bringing up Hunter Clegg and Keanu Tanavasa. I've tried to make myself forget that they're now Cougars.
Carson Ryan too, but
That's right. Dang it. That's right. I forgot about Carson Ryan too. That's a couple guys. Not the Clegg one is actually the one that I like. Obviously Tanavasa has been talked about so much. Like I forgot about Clegg for a moment. So as soon as I heard that, I was like, and then Tassili Akana is back as well. So that's just another high recruit in the state too. And this speaks to the trends that BYU has made. They've done a very good job and they're reaping the benefits of that right now. But it is going to be interesting to see with this Utah team. And Jake, even what Arizona State did last year, it gives Utah hope that, hey, we're in a much better position right now than that Arizona State team was a year ago. Like, why can't we be the team that surprises everyone? We have a Kyle Whittingham has done great things and some premium talent. At least it appears that way on paper on both sides of the ball.
Well, and this is a league that, at least so far, has proven that you can go from bottom tier, in the case of Arizona State, literally pick dead last and finish at the top. So, yeah, there's a topsy-turvy nature to this league. The dichotomy I'm looking to see, it's not the dichotomy, the trajectory, that's what I was, trajectory I'm looking for from both of these programs, speaking of the Utes and the Cougars, is how much further can they both take it? Because you're right. Yeah. It kind of is trending towards, this is the tail end of the Kyle Whittingham era for the Utes. Can he get it to a place where he's comfortable stepping aside after this season? Because I don't think you can hold on that much longer and not have some discontent with the coaching staff. That's the issue I see, is if Kyle continues to linger and hold on to this and have a head coach in waiting like a Morgan Scalley, no matter how proud a guy like Morgan Scalley is, he's not going to hold on forever. So that's the interesting trajectory here to see where Utah gets to. And then in the case of BYU, can they really follow up what was a breakthrough season a year ago and go and play for the Big 12 title and go to the playoff? That's what the trajectory is for these two programs.
I think you're absolutely right. Morgan Scalley's done so much and he's sacrificed so much, turned down other opportunities and things of that nature. I mean, we know how much USC wanted him a couple years ago even. So it's been a lot that he's passed up for his opportunity to be the head coach at Utah. He already had to go through one cycle and wait. And is he going to want to do that again? Yes. Well, that'll be what's fascinating. Jake, this is something we hadn't even talked about. And honestly, I didn't think about it till now, but do you think Jay Hill will eventually get to that point? I mean, he's done such a great job with the Cougars defense. Do you think Jake Hill's a guy who's going to be fine being the number 2 at BYU for a while, just the DC, or eventually could you see him if some other school in the Big 12 or maybe somewhere else, like even a G5 school maybe had an opening, like would he go there?
Jay tried for every job in the Mountain West Conference when he was at Weber State and was passed over for every single one of them. I'm telling the New Mexicos, the Colorado States, you name a Mountain West school that had an opening during his final 3 or 4 years at Weber State. As I understand it, he applied for essentially every single one of those. And who knows why those programs didn't pick a guy like Jay Hill. Jay Hill is a phenomenal football coach. He came to BYU because I think he realized there was a glass ceiling he was running into, and he felt like maybe going to BYU and being the associate head coach, running a defense and rehabilitating a defense that had fallen on hard times would make him infinitely more attractive to the G5 and in particular the Power 5 ranks. Yeah, there's going to be a point in the next, I'd say 2-3 years that Jay will get an opportunity to be a head coach once again, whether that's at a high level G5. I would imagine he's probably looking at a P5 job ideally, and he's going to get a chance to run the ship once again, and he'll do phenomenally well. BYU's lucky to have him while they have him because he has been absolutely everything that Kalani Sitake and the Cougars could have hoped for.
He's done a great job. I mean, it's funny when you mention like the Mountain West jobs because, Jake, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the old Idaho coach is now the coach at New Mexico.
Yeah, Jason Eck is now at New Mexico, taking over for Bronco Mendenhall, obviously. So it's baffling to me that a guy that had just the crazy amounts of success that Jay Hill had at Weber State, I don't know what these Mountain West administrators were thinking at the time, because he would have knocked it out of the park with the New Mexico, with the Colorado State, heck, a San Jose State. Insert any Mountain West school program. Even he could have just revolutionized the entire deal. None of them took the swing on that, and all of them may get passed by now because I'm telling you, if he continues to have the success he's having with BYU's defense, there will be P5 programs like, hey, we want some of that.
They absolutely should. He's a phenomenal head coach. Weber State has taken a step back since he left. BYU has taken a step up. And like I said, it's one of those weird things. It definitely feels like other teams and programs made a mistake, but Jay's crushing it at BYU now from former Weber State coach. Shout out Big Sky. So be interesting to see how it all ends up shaking out. One thing that's also going to be interesting this week is we have Utah versus BYU for more than likely the final time on the hardwood this season, barring any crazy Big 12 tournament thing. So how is this going to play out? Can Utah shock the world in Provo? Probably not, but we're going to talk about it in one moment. Today's crossover episode of Locked On Utes and Locked On Cougars is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. We're all about the stats because numbers don't lie. And when it comes to the all-new Nissan Armada Pro times 4X or dash 4X, the numbers are on an MVP level with the ability to tow up to 8,500 pounds. It can quite literally carry the whole team plus the gear wherever you need to go. It's powered by twin-turbo V6 engine, delivering the strength and performance to handle highways, back roads, and everything in between. And with room for up to 8 people, the Armada Pro times Dash 4X is built for a big crew, big adventures, and even bigger memories. Whether you're exploring off-road trails or rolling up to the arena, the Armada Pro 4X brings power, versatility, style, whatever you go. Take your adventures to new heights in the all-new Nissan Armada Pro 4X. Learn more at nissanusa.com. Head over and check out Nissan's inventory today. Jay Catch, I'm not going to lie. I do not think Saturday's going to go well for Utah. I know I'm locked on Utes. I know I'm locked on Utes guy, but I really try to pride myself, and I'm sure there's some BYU fans, maybe some Utah fans that'll roll their eyes at this. I really try to call it like I see it. And this Utah team, they're fighting hard right now. I really like the effort they displayed against West Virginia. There's some talented pieces and players. You mentioned Keanu Dawes. This is Gabe Madsen, Mason Maston, their last regular season game. Lawson Lovering to Ezra Asar. Like, there are Jake Wallin. These are guys here for Utah like that have played. They've done well. This is a team that no one expected them to even be in the top of the conference, like top 10 of the conference. So the fact they're here, they're doing good things. But the end of the day, this is also true. Like, Utah just announced who their next head coach is going to be. It's not Josh Eiler. Like, Utah has decided to just move on, and they're ready to get the season over with and move forward. Those players are going to show up. They're going to fight. BYU has everything going for them right now. The Cougars are rolling. Kevin Young's doing a great job. The big win against Iowa State, and we got them once already this season. We beat BYU. Those Cougar fans aren't going to forget that. I do think Utah battles in this one. I don't think they're going to be like get blown out by anything crazy. But I could absolutely see a BYU win by 20-plus points just with the way the Cougars are playing right now. These are two programs trending in opposite directions, at least until Alex Jensen does officially walk into the Huntsman.
All right, so here's the deal. I look at this as I expect Utah to come in and play with pride because that's essentially what they're playing for. BYU, in all reality as well, JT, they're locked into the number 4 seed next week in the Big 12 tournament. So there's not a ton on the line for these two programs. So it's all for pride. It's all for rivalry's sake. And I fully expect BYU to obviously want to get payback on Utah for the loss up at the Huntsman Center. So here's where I'm gonna insert what I think tomorrow's game is good for both sides. It's for Utah players that are gonna get scouted by BYU coaches and see if they can bring them into the transfer portal.
I can't. I'm hosting this episode, by the way. I'm very tempted to pull you out of the studio for that. I'm not going to lie. I really want to pull you out of the studio.
Jake Wallin, Ezra Alsar. Come on, guys. Keanu Dawes. You're going to get a look at your program. Come on, buddy. Let's go.
Those are literally the top 3. I did a show yesterday. Those are the top 3 guys I want to keep, by the way. Too. So
and I'm sure BYU is going to be scouting them very heavily and being like, they fit, but they look good in blue.
Yeah.
I only say that mildly facetiously because here's the deal, JT. Inevitably, there's going to be turnover with these rosters. I say that plural because BYU has guys like Fousseyni Traore who are playing their final game at BYU. So there are guys exiting both of these programs, but the transfer portal, it's going to open up a whole thing. So, yes, I'm only mildly sarcastic with that comment because I'm telling you, BYU will look at those guys and say, hey, do any of them tickle our fancy and maybe guys that we want to bring to BYU. But this is still a game that BYU, if they want to burn a lot of the goodwill that they have built up over the past 7 games, go and lose to Utah and lose the season series to the Utes. That's going to sit well with Cougar fans.
Won't sit so well with NCAA committee members either. That'll be a blemish on their records. That's the other thing that's up for grabs here. And Jake, as much as I would love to accuse you of being facetious, you only kind of did exactly that for football when you grabbed Keanu Tanavasa, Carson Ryan. It's the same. I mean, the same thing. So that's where we saw how this went last time, and in terms of just grabbing some former Utes like that. So
I've got one question for you. If Utah were to shock the world here, what will it take? Will it be Gabe Madsen just going outside of his ever-loving mind, just making 3 after 3? Is that the way that Utah pulls off this upset?
I actually think they do. I think it's that coupled with a similar recipe to Kansas. Like, they're just playing so hard. They're getting the rebounds. It's a big Utah team. Asar, Keanu Dawes is a really good rebounder. Lawson Lovering is another guy too. So they got some size. BYU obviously does too. Speaking of Utah players who are now at BYU, I'm just thinking about some of the Keba Keita blocks I've seen on the season that make me very sad. So I think that's
Iowa State, baby. Let's go.
Oh my gosh. It was wild. And yeah, I mean, that's a great guy right there. Like I mentioned, I mean, Keba's a guy that I would really wish was still at Utah, and he moved on, and there could be some other guys too. But yeah, definitely feels like Utah's recipe is going crazy from getting a great game. The Madsen twins, like if they could go nuts in their final regular season game along the boards too. I mean, Jake, am I forgetting anything? Like maybe a BYU weakness that Utah could exploit? Is there anything missing?
Well, BYU was the first team in like 30 years to beat a top 25 team with 29 turnovers. They had 29 giveaways against Iowa State. I will be floored if BYU wins another game in the next 5 years with that many turnovers. I don't care what the opponent is. They have been far too careless at times with the ball, speaking of the Cougars. And I'm talking, it's not any particular player. You can look at the distribution of the turnovers. It's pretty evenly across the board, mainly led by the guards and Dallin Hall and Jaeger Demon. Those two guys obviously handle the ball the most. They'll turn it over the most. That's just par for the course with college basketball. But if BYU has that turnover bug crop up here and Utah can make him pay for it, that's where this game could tip. And I'm not saying that I'm all that worried about BYU losing to Utah, because I think there's a lot of motivation, because there was a lot of people that were bitter that BYU lost at Utah for the second straight year, all that stuff. So that alone, I think, will propel BYU in this one. But if there is a route to Utah pulling off the upset, yeah, it's that turnover issue that BYU continues time and time and again to rear its ugly head. And if they can't get it figured out, they could find themselves in a world of hurt.
Could be a world of hurt for Utah, but I'll say this, Jake. I still love that this rivalry allows us to play each other twice a year. I think it's a lot of fun having these two teams together.
And that's the thing about this is a lot of people, and I talk to people, I think most of our listeners know I do sports radio here in Salt Lake City. So we play both sides of it with DJ and PK. We get conversations all the time from people saying, hey, I don't miss the rivalry at all. And I think that's a tiny minority of the overall fan bases. Mm-hmm. This rivalry, it gives life to everything in the state, it feels like. And the thing about it is the fact that they get to play home and home in basketball, it's like it always was back in the WAC, back in the Mountain West era. There is just something nostalgic and right about these two wearing, in the case of BYU, royal blue, and in the case of Utah, wearing that crimson red and going head to head on the hardwoods. It is absolutely awesome. And I am so excited to have these two back together in the same conference.
I am too. Almost as excited as I am next year for Alex Jensen versus Kevin Young in this game too. That's nice.
It will. And that's the thing about this is you're going to have two guys who have NBA backgrounds matching wits at that point. And that'll be fun in and of itself. I also look at this game, and if you're a Utah fan who's wanting to get maybe an insight as to how Utah's offense, how Utah's program may operate on the hardwoods next year, just look at Kevin Young's system. The NBA is a copycat league, and that's all these coaches that go through the NBA, they all kind of learn the same concepts, and we're talking offensively and defensively. So if you want to, as a Utah fan, I guess you're viewing, if you're watching this for a specific thing, look at how BYU operates their system and envision that similar format. It may have some tweaks to it, a few different changes, but I'm telling you, by and large, be a very similar type deal that Utah fans will be looking at a year from now.
And that should excite Utah fans because BYU, as much as they are a rival too, they're a top 25 team. So that's the goal if you're Utah. Get a top 25 team. Be a team that, yes, Utah upset Kansas and things of that nature, but be a team that you can go into a place like Ames and get a monster win there. So that's the hope. Should be a fun week. Jake, always appreciate you stopping by. Thanks, my friend.
Absolutely. Anytime, my friend.
Make sure you check out Locked On Utes and Locked On Cougars. We'll continue to keep you covered, all the latest in Utah and BYU athletics. Hope everyone enjoys the game this weekend, and we'll be back recapping it all this coming week. Have a great weekend, everyone. Enjoy Utah versus BYU in the Big 12 on the hardwood, part 2.